She cried at the terminal like it meant something. Her voice cracked my name like a prayer, like it could undo what she'd done, but I kept walking. Past gate 6, past the smell of cinnamon pretzels, past the ghost of everything we used to be. I didn't turn around, not once. People say airports are where stories begin. Ours ended on a cold tile, between missed flights and unspoken truths. She had begged for one last hug, just one. Said it with trembling lips and that rehearsed innocence I used to fall for, but I didn't fall this time, not after what I found in her phone, not after she introduced me to her boss, the one she barely knew, with lipstick still smudged across his collar. I used to think pain had a sound, a thunderclap, a scream, but heartbreak is quiet, it hums in your chest, sit behind your ribs, leave a ring in your ears when you try to sleep. When I boarded that flight, I didn't just leave her behind, I left behind the man who believed her. And I knew. She didn't expect that, she thought I'd turn back, like I always did, like love made me blind and forgiveness made me weak. But this time, I chose the silence over the siren. She begged for one last hug, I gave her my back. And that was the most honest goodbye I'd ever given. Airports are meant for beginnings, for hopeful goodbyes and tearful reunions. But that day, gate 6 felt like a tomb. 4 hours early, and I still felt late, to healing. To understand. To let go. I sat near the glass wall, watching planes blink against the early dusk, every takeoff a promise someone else still believed in. She was already there, pacing outside the terminal cafe, phone clutched like a lifeline she hadn't earned. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it behind a practiced calm, lips moving as she mouthed some excuse, a lie rehearsed to sound like love. I watched her before she saw me. Her back was straight, chin tilted just enough to feign dignity, but I noticed her left heel wobble every time she turned too fast. She was unraveling, slowly, beautifully, like the first thread pulled from a silk dress. Then her eyes caught mine, and the act vanished. She broke into a run, mascara trailing like bruises down her cheeks, the suitcase behind her toppled, forgotten. People turned to look, but I didn't. She stopped just short of me, out of breath, as if my silence had winded her more than the sprint. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice too soft, too familiar. I swallowed, not anger, not pain, just the urge to surrender again. But I remembered the voicemail, the hotel name that slipped from her boss's lips, the lipstick that wasn't mine. "Not here," I said. She blinked, stunned. Why not here? She loved grand gestures, loved saving face, loved watching the world believe she was the victim. I stood, took one long look at her, really looked. Not at the eyes I used to write poems about, not at the trembling lip she used to bite when nervous, but at the stranger in front of me, the woman who kissed someone else and then asked me to stay. I walked past her, to the kiosk, booked a one-way flight, no checked baggage, just my backpack and a heart I didn't unpacked in weeks. She followed, of course. Her footsteps were frantic, mismatched, like someone chasing a version of me that no longer existed. "Where are you going?" she asked. I didn't answer, because it didn't matter. The gate number printed in sharp black letters on my boarding pass, gate 6. She read it over my shoulder, and that's when the panic set in. Her hand grazed my arm. "Please," she whispered. "Just talk to me, just one last hug, that's all I'm asking." I looked at her, really looked. Her face was stained with a desperation that might have moved me once, but now it just looked like makeup melting under regret. "Okay," I said. She exhaled like I'd handed her the universe. But as she stepped forward, I turned my back and walked away. Not fast, not in anger, just with purpose. I didn't look over my shoulder, didn't wait to see if she followed, didn't listen for footsteps or apologies or sobs. Because that hug, it was never for me. It was her absolution. A final curtain call for a show she directed, where I played the fool for too many acts. And this time, I wasn't giving her the final bow. The terminal glass reflected her silhouette, frozen, arms half lifted toward a man already disappearing past the security line. I let the guards scan my pass. Let them wave me through like this was any normal day. It wasn't. Inside, everything was too bright, too sterile, but inside me, there was finally a breath of space. I found an empty seat by the window, gate sign glowing faint above me like a quiet goodbye. Gate 6. She wouldn't know where I was going, she didn't deserve to. Because if I told her, she'd find a way to make it about her again. I glanced at the boarding pass once more, a new city, a place where no one knew the version of me who waited, who begged, who forgave infidelity with hopeful hands. She wanted a hug, I gave her something better. The silence she earned. Outside, rain started tapping on the glass, soft, relentless. It blurred her silhouette until even I couldn't tell if she was still there. Maybe that's how it should have ended, not with screaming, not with closure, but with mist on a window and a name I'd never say again. A voice crackled over the speakers. Final boarding. I stood. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness, from freedom. As I approached the line, I looked down at my phone. A message lit the screen. I still love you, please just say goodbye properly. I didn't reply. I put the phone on airplane mode and stepped forward. Some people need words to feel closure, some need a hug. Me? I just needed the sound of my footsteps walking away from everything that broke me. And that sound, it was beautiful. It was 2:14 a.m. when her phone rang. I remember the exact time because I had just rolled over, reaching instinctively for the warmth beside me, only to feel the chill of her empty pillow. She'd been in the shower for a while. Steam clung to the bathroom mirror like the secrets she hadn't wiped clean. And her phone, left carelessly charging by the nightstand, lit up the darkness like a flare I didn't want to see. I blinked at the screen once, twice. Mr. Ellison. Work. Odd name to call at this hour for someone who barely knew her outside office hours. I hesitated. Just long enough to pretend I was still the kind of man who trusted her. But curiosity, or maybe survival, reached for it. No password. She never locked it. She said she had nothing to hide. The voicemail icon glowed, unplayed. I tapped it, and just like that, the walls of our bedroom began to rot. Last night was worth every risk. I can still taste you on my fingers. Silence, except for the water still running behind the door, except for the sound of something inside me collapsing. The message ended. My breathing didn't. She stepped out seconds later, wrapped in a white towel, hair dripping. She looked tired, but not guilty yet, until she saw me, holding her phone, and then, her breath caught like it had hit glass. My name slipped from her lips in a whisper, a single syllable, sharp and fragile, Daniel. I stared at her, not as a lover, not even as a man betrayed, but as a stranger suddenly became aware he'd been sleeping beside fiction. She opened her mouth to explain, but even she couldn't find the lie fast enough. Say it, I said, voice low, flat. Say what he meant by that. She froze, wrapped in terry cloth and trembling truth. It was a mistake. Just once. I was drunk. We were both. I raised my hand, not to strike, not even to silence, just to stop myself from shattering. Don't, I said, don't call it a mistake like it was an accident. You don't fall onto someone's fingers by accident. Her lips parted in protest, but I was already walking, past the bed where she used to lay her head on my chest, past the bookshelf where we kept the Polaroid of our first trip to the mountains, past the nightstand where I'd hidden the ring I hadn't had the courage to give her. I walked into the hallway, into the kitchen, into a silence I hadn't tasted in months. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, typed in one-way flights near me. Because if love was going to end, I wanted it to end with a direction, even if it was away from her. Behind me, the bathroom door never creaked open again. She didn't follow, she didn't scream. She just stayed in that bedroom, wrapped in her own choices. And I sat at the table, watching plain routes flash across my screen, wondering which one would feel furthest from the scent of her perfume. Tokyo, Lisbon, Barcelona. She hadn't touched me. The clock struck 3:07 a.m. I opened the drawer beside me, the same drawer where I kept receipts, old chargers and that velvet box. I pulled it out. I opened it. The ring glinted under the kitchen light. A small, silent reminder of the future I once carved with trembling hands. I had memorized her ring size from a silver band she wore on Sundays. I had chosen the stone to match the color of her eyes just before dusk. I closed the box, put it back, then slammed the drawer. Some endings don't need sound, they need finality. I went back to the bedroom an hour later. She was asleep, or pretending to be, back turned, towel replaced by one of my shirts. I didn't touch her. I didn't say goodnight. Instead, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, counting each breath like it owed me answers. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. At 6:32 a.m., I booked the flight. One way, no return, no forwarding address. Because I realized then, you don't need fire to burn a home. Sometimes, betrayal does it quietly, and I wasn't going to be the ashes she used for warmth anymore. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Not stormy, just gray. That dull, silencing kind of gray that made everything feel half alive, like the world didn't know whether to mourn or move on. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, frying eggs in olive oil that crackled like static. The toast had just popped. The kettle hissed behind me. It was strange how normal my hands looked, steady, familiar, even though the man behind them wasn't. And then I heard her. Soft footsteps, hesitant like guilt. She stood at the kitchen doorway, wrapped in my hoodie, the one she always stole after arguments, like fabric could forgive what words couldn't. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed like a shield. "You're up early," she said, voice low. I didn't answer. I plated the eggs. 2 slices of toast, perfectly golden, one for me, one out of habit. She stepped closer. The silence between us felt thick, like fog. "It wasn't what it sounded like," she whispered. I paused, not because I believed her, but because betrayal always opens with that line, as if rewriting the scene makes it less real. She walked around the counter, brushing too close to me. Our shoulders didn't touch, but the space between them crackled louder than fire. "It was a confusing moment," she continued, eyes searching mine. "I was scared, I felt overwhelmed by how much I love you. And there it was. The lie dressed like a sonnet, betrayal sprayed with the perfume of poetry, sweet, hollow, rehearsed." I stared at her, not angrily, not bitterly, just empty. "You were scared?" I repeated. She nodded. "Yes, I didn't mean to." I set the fork down, slowly. And then I said the only thing I had left in me. "Pack whatever you want, I'm leaving first." Her mouth fell open slightly, not in shock. She'd expected shouting, rage, but not this. Stillness was a language she never learned to speak. She stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway. "Is this about him?" Her voice trembled, not with sorrow, with fear of consequence. I shook my head. "No," I said, "it's about me." And for the first time, I meant it. Because for too long, I'd bent backward until my spine forgot what standing straight felt like. I forgave too fast, trusted too hard, waited for a version of her that maybe never existed. She stared at me like I'd become someone she couldn't recognize. I walked past her anyway, back into the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out the suitcase I used when we first moved in together. She followed me in, eyes wide, lips pressed tight like she was holding back every word that might have changed things 2 weeks ago. But now? Now, words were just threadbare excuses. "Please don't go like this," she said. We are good together." I folded 2 shirts, then a sweater, left the one she bought me on our anniversary untouched. I didn't want to take her ghost with me. "Were we?" I asked, not angrily, just truthfully. She swallowed. Her eyes flickered to the painting above our bed, the one we bought from a street artist in Venice, a couple dancing under red rain. "I made a mistake," she said softly. "No. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, a mistake is burning the rice. You don't accidentally betray someone, you choose to." But I didn't say that, I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. About the man I became when I kept forgiving what should have ended. About the way I stared at her late at night, wondering why love felt like holding my breath. I zipped the bag. She flinched at the sound, like it was a door slamming shut. And in a way, it was. Outside, the clouds finally wept, rain traced down the window like silent applause for the end of our act. She stood near the window, hands trembling. "I love you," she whispered. I believed that once, believed it through broken promises and half-truths and lipstick that didn't belong to her shade, but love isn't supposed to feel like a test. I keep failing. So I walked to the door, stopped once. I looked back at her, still wrapped in my hoodie, still trembling. "You didn't lose me because you kissed him," I said. She blinked. "You lost me when you tried to blame it on love." And then I left. The rain hit harder. Like it knew I wouldn't come back. We were supposed to get engaged next month. She didn't know I had already bought the ring. Didn't know I had practiced the proposal in my head 100 times. Under fireworks, under snowfall. Under the soft lantern lights of Kyoto, on her dream trip she never stopped talking about. She didn't know any of that, but I did. And that morning, in the half-light of a house that no longer felt like home, I opened the drawer where I'd hidden it. The third one down, right side of the desk. Buried beneath a mess of tax receipts, old instruction manuals, and a coupon for a ramen place we used to love. It had been there for 11 days. I counted. Because that's how long it had been since I started doubting her laugh. I reached for it slowly, like touching it might burn. My fingers found the velvet box, cold and heavy, like grief packed in satin. I opened it. The diamond sat quietly. No sparkle, just a dull glint under morning light. Like even it knew the story had changed. I held it in my palm. Not like a promise, like a dead butterfly, once meant to fly, now just a memory with wings. My thumb traced the edge of the band. I had spent weeks choosing it. White gold, simple setting, nothing extravagant, just enough to say, I see you and I always will. I remember the day I bought it. She was at yoga. I told her I was running errands. I walked into the store, with my heart beating like I was about to say something brave. Walked out with a small bag and a secret that felt too big for my chest. I hid it. Not out of fear, but because I wanted the moment to be perfect. It was supposed to be spring, cherry blossoms, Kyoto. We'd take the train to Gion, rent bikes, and I'd propose under strings of paper lanterns in Maruyama Park. That was the dream. But dreams can rot too, quietly, one voicemail at a time. I stared at the ring a moment longer, wondering if it still meant anything. If maybe, in another life, I could rewind us to before she whispered someone else's name in a hotel room. But I couldn't. And so, I stood, walked to the kitchen, set the box on the table. I didn't even hear her stir in the bedroom behind me. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock and the rain against the windows. Rain, again, always rain these days, as if the sky itself was stuck in mourning. I reached for a notepad, tore off a sheet, wrote only 7 words. Return to sender. The dream changed. I placed the note beside the ring, straightened it, as if neatness could soften what it meant. There was no ceremony to it, no drama, just the quiet decision to stop offering pieces of myself to someone who'd already decided they weren't enough. Behind me, I heard the faint creak of the hallway floor. She was awake. Maybe she saw me from the shadowed doorway. Maybe she didn't. I didn't turn around to find out. Instead, I walked to the window and watched the rain. Each drop felt like punctuation, like the sky finishing sentences I couldn't say out loud. I imagined her stepping into the kitchen after I left, finding the box, reading the note. I wondered if she'd cry, if her fingers would hover over the velvet lid before she opened it, if she'd realize the weight of what she never got to wear. Some love stories don't get closure, they get clarity. They don't end because time runs out. They end because the truth stepped in too soon. I wanted to love her for the rest of my life. Instead, I learned to leave her for the sake of mine, and in that moment, watching the rain paint streaks across the glass, I didn't feel heartbreak, I felt released, because love, real love, should never feel like waiting for someone to remember how to hold you. It should never feel like begging silence for an answer. The ring remained on the table when I walked out the door. Not forgotten. Left behind, deliberately. Like a chapter I refused to keep rereading. The terminal was humming with lives that didn't belong to me, children dragging bright backpacks, businessmen barking into phones, couples clinging to each other like time owed them mercy. And then, there was her. She arrived like a storm pretending to be sunlight. heels clicking too confidently across the tile, hair curled to perfection, lips glossed just enough to catch the light. As if she believed looking beautiful could undo betrayal, as if pain could be powdered over with foundation and fake grace. I spotted her before she spotted me, watched as she scanned the crowd, frantic beneath the surface, like a performer waiting for her cue. And then our eyes met. She froze. For a second, she wasn't poised. She was just her again, raw and afraid. But only for a second. Then the show began. She rushed toward me, heels too high for the urgency she wore. Mascara already smudging, her suitcase bouncing behind her, forgotten like the promises she once made. "Daniel," she choked out, loud, unfiltered. People turned, and that's when I realized, this wasn't for me, it was for them. She cried like cameras might be watching, voice cracking in perfect intervals. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "Please, we can fix this." I stood still. She reached for my hand, and I let her touch it, for a moment. Just enough for her to believe she still had a script to follow. "I was scared," she said again. "I was stupid. But I never stopped loving you. We were good, weren't we?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because the moment I gave her anything, she'd twist it into her next act. So she leaned in. Right there, in front of gate 6. She tried to kiss me. I flinched back. People noticed, their glances were sharp, whispering, and for once, I didn't care how I looked. Because I wasn't the fool in love anymore. I wasn't the man who'd hold her hand in public and break behind closed doors. "No," I said. Quiet. Final. She blinked, stunned. Like denial wasn't in the lines she'd rehearsed. "This isn't who we are," she pleaded. "No," I replied, voice even. "This is who you are." I turned then, toward the gate, toward the voice over the speaker announcing boarding, toward the future that didn't have her name carved into it anymore. But she wasn't finished. She grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to make me stop. "Just one last hug," she whispered. I didn't move, didn't answer. She stepped closer, voice trembling now. "Please, just one. You owe me that much." "Oh?" That word echoed in my head like a cracked bell. I turned slowly to face her. She looked up at me, eyes glossy, face painted with desperation masquerading as remorse, and suddenly, I saw her. Not the woman I used to love, not the girl who danced barefoot in my apartment to old records, not the partner who once traced stars on my back while we whispered dreams into each other's skin. No, I saw the mask, perfectly crafted, flawlessly cracked, a woman who cried louder when people were watching, who apologized only when her comfort was at risk, who treated forgiveness like an encore she expected, no matter the act before it. The silence between us stretched thin. The boarding line moved forward, the flight attendant called my group. Still, I said nothing. She reached out again, hands shaking. And for a breathless second, I almost did it. I almost hugged her. Almost let the weight of history fool me into thinking comfort was the same thing as closure. But love isn't a performance, and I wasn't her audience anymore. So I shook my head. Gently, no anger, no hatred, just the simple truth of a man who had finally stopped breaking for someone else's redemption arc. I stepped back. She stood frozen, lips parted, tears welling but unshed now. Because she knew. This was the end of the show. I turned to board, and this time, she didn't follow. The last thing I heard before the plane doors closed behind me wasn't her voice. It was silent. And in that silence, I finally exhaled. As she didn't know where I was flying. And that made it perfect. No text, no airport clue left behind, no tearful destination she could trace in a search bar later, trying to run into me, by accident. Because this wasn't a trip, it was an escape. My name was printed clearly on the boarding pass, but the arrival gate, that was mine alone. I sat by the window, watching the rain blur the runway lig. HTs like smudged watercolors. People rushed down the aisle with the urgency of purpose, honeymoons, reunions, business calls. But I had no plan, just motion. The seat beside me stayed empty. The flight attendant asked if I wanted to switch. I shook my head. There was something sacred about that space, something honest. It reminded me of all the dinners I ate beside her while she texted someone else. Of the car rides where her body faced me, but her mind was miles away. Now, the silence beside me wasn't absence, it was peace. We took off. Wheels lifted, and with them, so did the last piece of weight I'd been dragging behind my ribs. I looked out the window as the earth shrank. The airport faded into distance, the city blurred into soft glows. Her silhouette, if she was even still there, was swallowed by clouds. And somewhere between the ascent and the hum of recycled air, I finally breathed. Not deeply, not cleanly. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't choke on it. Because she had been my oxygen. At least, I thought she was. But now I knew. She was also my smoke. Thick, sweet at first. Then suffocating in every way I didn't notice until too late. Love shouldn't leave your lungs aching. It shouldn't be something you survive. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, watching the clouds roll beneath us like folded linen. I whispered, goodbye. Not out loud, just in my head. Soft and final, like the last page of a letter never sent. A goodbye she'd never hear, a sentence with no reply. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note, the one I'd written, but never handed her. Just 4 lines, barely legible. You didn't lose me in one night, you lost me slowly, with every silence you chose over truth, and every moment I loved you alone. I folded it back, tighter this time, not out of anger, just to make it smaller, easier to forget. The plane jolted softly, and I looked around, strangers settling in, a child asleep 2 rows ahead, a woman reading a romance novel across the aisle. She turned the page just as my heart turned its own. No more closure, no more hoping she'd appear at my door with shaking hands and a voice full of regret. I was done giving her the stage. From this moment forward, I'd live in the quiet between sentences. The peace in empty seats, the truth in unsaid words. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked overhead. I obeyed. Not because I was afraid of falling, but because I had already done that once, with her. And now, I was done crashing. The pilot's voice crackled overhead, something about arrival time, weather, a smooth flight. I didn't listen, I didn't need to know what the weather was like wherever I was landing. Because this flight, this wasn't about the arrival, it was about leaving, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to go back. 6 months later, I was living in Barcelona, not hiding, not healing, just living. In a city that didn't know my name, a city that didn't whisper her voice into my ears every time it rained. The mornings smelled different here, fresh bread, sea salt, and something warm I hadn't tasted in months, freedom. I had rented a small flat near Carrer de Verdi, narrow balcony, cracked walls, but the light poured in like forgiveness. I spoke broken Spanish to the old woman downstairs who sold oranges and flowers. She never asked why I always bought lilies, the only flower I knew she hated. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was symbolic. Either way, the petals brightened my kitchen like pieces of a self I was learning to put back together. There was no ring in a drawer anymore, no drawer, filled with could-haves. Just ceramic mugs I bought from a flea market and a pan that always burned the first pancake. I learned to cook alone, not out of necessity, but to prove to myself I didn't need someone to set the table for it to feel like home. I played music while I cleaned, not sad songs, not breakup anthems, just jazz, old Spanish guitar, melodies without words, because sometimes silence speaks clearer than apologies. I laughed again, at street musicians, at my own burnt toast, at nothing at all. And when I did, it didn't feel like betrayal, it felt like breath. I didn't check her socials, didn't ask mutual friends about her, didn't need to know if she missed me, because I finally stopped missing myself. One afternoon, while the city slept in golden light, my phone buzzed, a message from an old number that still made my stomach tighten for half a second. Her. It read, "I still think about the airport, about the hug." That was it, no punctuation, no apology, just 7 words clinging to something already buried. I stared at the screen. Thumb hovering. Heart. Still. Not angry, not broken, just still. I didn't reply. Because some ghosts deserve their haunting. Some memories deserve their silence. If I had answered, I would have told her. The hug wasn't the goodbye, the silence after it was. I turned the phone off. Set it beside a half-finished sketch I'd been working on, a scene of a man standing alone in an empty terminal, back to a woman holding nothing but her guilt. It wasn't bitter, it was honest. Like me now. I wasn't glowing because I'd moved on to someone new. I was glowing because I'd moved back to myself. I walked to the window. Barcelona breathed below, narrow alleys, children kicking soccer balls, tourists pointing up at cathedrals like wonder could still be found in stone, and in that moment, I knew, she'd never get to see this version of me. The one who no longer begged, the one who no longer bent, the one who didn't need to be loved loudly to feel whole. The version of me that no longer asked what he did wrong, only what he could do next. I poured a glass of red wine, took it to the balcony, let the breeze run its fingers through my hair like her hands never would again. Below, a street artist played violin, something slow, something sad, but somehow, I smiled, because pain had become a painting I no longer needed to hang, and her name was just a chapter, not a curse, not a song stuck in my throat, just ink, dry. People say closure is a door, neat, symbolic, something you close softly behind you with a sigh, but mine wasn't a door, it was a gate. Gate 6, the kind with metal rails and tired floors and a departure screen that didn't know how to lie. The place where the final version of me was born, not with hope, but with resolve. She had begged for one last hug that day, just one, like it was small, like it wasn't laced with everything she never said when it would have mattered, like it could wipe away the voice on her voicemail, the ring I never gave, the bed she shared with someone else. I remember how her voice broke when she asked, not like glass, but like something scripted to shatter. "Please," she whispered, eyes wide, mascara smeared. "Just one last hug." But I stood there, still as stone, watching her tremble under her own performance. And for the first time in forever, I didn't reach out. Not because I hated her, not because I wanted revenge, but because I understood something deeper. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is let someone feel the absence they created. You don't fill that silence for them, you leave it. I turned away from her, and as I did, I felt the weight shift inside my chest. Not like something breaking, but like something unbuckling. I didn't look back. And that choice, that single moment of refusal, was the most radical act of self-love I'd ever committed. Because I had loved her so much, I let her ruin me, loved her so blindly, I mistook the ache for intimacy. But no more. That final hug wasn't for healing, it was for her conscience. A closing act in a story where she always played the misunderstood victim. And I wouldn't play my part anymore. The gate attendant scanned my pass. I stepped forward. The wheels of the plane waited just beyond the glass, indifferent and ready. As I walked toward the boarding tunnel, I felt it, that slow unraveling of who I had been. The man who forgave too easily, who waited in doorways, who answered texts that arrived hours late with apologies he shouldn't have written. At gate 6, I walked away from that man. And with every step, I became someone else, someone whole, someone who understood that love isn't proven through suffering. It's measured by how much of yourself you don't have to lose to keep it. The hug she asked for, the one she thought would end things softly, it never came. Because I didn't want softness, I wanted truth. And the truth was this. If you love someone, you don't put them in a position to question their worth, you don't gamble their trust for fleeting attention, you don't whisper intimacy into two mouths and call it confusion. I reached my seat, window again, always the window. The hum of the engines began, the seat beside me was empty, and I smiled. Not out of pettiness, not because I won, but because peace feels like an empty seat where chaos used to sit. Somewhere below, she was probably still standing there, maybe crying, maybe angry, maybe already rehearsing the story she'd tell others, about how I left without giving her a chance, how I was cold, how she just needed a moment. Let her. Because I no longer needed to correct her version of events, I knew mine, and that was enough. The plane lifted off. Clouds blurred beneath us, soft and distant. And as I leaned back in the seat, eyes closing slowly, I whispered, not to her, but to the version of me that waited too long to leave. You're free now. That hug, it was the last one she'd never get. Not because I didn't love her, but because, for the first time, I loved myself more.